The vampire alien girl was left for dead until a human saved her. The stars were quiet that night. Far away from any busy colony or trade route, the space between systems was a dark, empty corridor. Only the faint glow of distant suns lit the endless black, and the occasional flicker of a long-forgotten satellite drifted slowly, like a ghost. Most ships avoided this sector. There were no profitable resources, no signals to intercept, and nothing anyone cared about. But for Elias Rowe, this empty stretch of space was home. Elias was a human engineer, not the type who built grand ships or commanded fleets, but one who kept the small, forgotten parts of space running. Satellites, relay stations, energy collectors, his hands touched the pieces of human civilization no one else noticed. He liked it that way. In the quiet, he could think, tinker, and fix things without interruptions. Most people thought humans were reckless or fragile, but Elias had always believed humans thrived where others did not, simply because they refused to give up. That night, his routine was simple. He floated along the maintenance corridor of a small relay station, checking panels and adjusting minor malfunctions. The hum of the station's life support filled the air, a familiar, comforting sound. Outside the transparent wall of the corridor, stars stretched endlessly, indifferent to his work. Elias had seen the emptiness enough times to understand its weight. Space did not care who lived or who died. He froze when a flicker of motion caught his eye. At first, he thought it was a trick of the lights, a reflection, or a minor glitch in the visual feed. But no, it was real. Something drifted toward the station, a small, pod-shaped object twisting slowly as it spun. Its surface was scratched and scorched in places, and faint lights blinked weakly along its hull. Curiosity outweighed caution. Elias maneuvered closer in his suit. The pod was old, possibly abandoned for decades. There were no markings he recognized. He pressed a panel to scan it. Energy readings were faint, almost non-existent. Whoever or whatever was inside had been adrift for a long time. Elias had seen many derelicts in his career. Most carried empty cargo or at best dead passengers. He knew the protocol. He could report it to the authorities and move on. The rules were clear. Abandoned pods were dangerous, and investigating them could cost him his job. But something in his gut told him this was different. A faint energy signature still pulsed inside, weak but alive. Someone was inside. He opened the airlock. Inside, the pod was small, barely big enough for a human. Its walls were smooth and cold, humming with fading power. And there she was. A girl, or at least she looked like a girl. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes were closed. Dark hair clung to her face, floating slightly in the low gravity. Her body was thin, fragile, and her chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. Elias realized immediately that she was alive, but barely. Something about her was unusual. He reached out carefully. Her skin was cold to the touch, but there was life beneath it. Her body gave a faint pulse, almost as if the pod itself were keeping her alive. Elias' training told him to stay calm, to move slowly. But his heart raced anyway. He didn't know her species, or even if she was human, but he knew one thing: he couldn't leave her here. He tapped a few controls on the pod, trying to stabilize its power. Lights blinked, flickered, and then went dark. A hiss of escaping gas echoed through the small chamber. The pod had failed. Elias acted quickly. He wrapped the pod in a tether net he carried for emergencies and pulled it closer to the station's docking arm. He could barely lift it, but human determination made up for strength. Inside the pod, the girl shifted slightly, and a faint, almost inaudible whimper escaped her lips. For a moment, Elias hesitated. He didn't know what she would think if she woke. Some species attacked when surprised, some panicked. But then he reminded himself of something simple and human. Anyone in danger deserved help. Fear didn't matter, not here, not now. The pod was secured. He carried it carefully into the medical bay, an area designed for emergency human patients. As he worked, he examined her more closely. Her features were delicate, almost ethereal. Her ears were slightly pointed, but not sharply so. Her hands were small, with long fingers, and her breathing was shallow. Her body radiated faint warmth, but it was fading quickly. Elias had no idea what she needed. He had no medical protocol for alien species, and yet he knew the answer was obvious: keep her alive, stabilize her, and hope. He connected life support monitors, improvising connections where he could. He adjusted the station's radiation filters, increasing ambient energy just slightly, guessing at what might sustain her. His hands moved carefully but confidently. Every tool he had was used with purpose. Every adjustment was a test of patience and intuition. Hours passed. The station hummed quietly. Outside, stars shone indifferently. Inside, life and hope clung together in a fragile balance. Finally, she stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, revealing irises that shimmered in faint silver light. They were large, unnaturally so, and they moved with caution, scanning the room. When she saw Elias, her lips parted in a silent gasp. Elias held up his hands in peace. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said softly. "I'm just helping." She didn't respond immediately. Her gaze was sharp, calculating, as if weighing every possibility. Then she spoke, her voice a whisper, almost musical. "Why?" Elias smiled faintly, though exhaustion weighed on him. "Because I don't leave people behind, doesn't matter who they are." For the first time, her tense shoulders relaxed slightly. She studied him, noting every line of his face, every careful movement. She had expected rejection, suspicion, perhaps even hostility. Instead, there was calm, patience, care, something she had never seen before. "My name, Nyxara," she said finally, the syllables soft and foreign. "You saved me." "I'm Elias," he replied. "And yeah, I did. You'd be dead out there if I didn't." Nyxara's lips pressed into a thin line. Her people, she realized, would have left her. They would have considered her weakness a liability. But this human, this strange, stubborn species, they refused to abandon the weak. Hours turned into days. Elias kept her safe, adjusting energy levels, monitoring vital signs, and improvising a habitat that could sustain her fragile body. Nyxara was quiet, observing him, learning. She noticed how humans adapted to problems, how they didn't panic when things failed, how they could find solutions even without perfect knowledge. It was alien to her, yet comforting, and she began to understand something simple and powerful: human determination. The refusal to give up. For the first time, Nyxara allowed herself to feel something she had never known: trust. That night, she watched Elias work silently, repairing circuits and calibrating energy emitters. His hands moved steadily, confidently. His focus never wavered. And she realized something startling. Humans, despite their fragility, survived where others would perish. They adapted. They endured. They refused to be discarded. Nyxara had been abandoned by the stars, rejected by her own people. But here, in this quiet human station, she had found life again. Not by chance, not by accident, but by the simple, stubborn determination of one human who refused to let go. And as she drifted into a light sleep, her body slowly regaining strength, she thought, maybe, just maybe, humans were the strongest creatures in the galaxy, not because of power or technology, but because of the heart to save those who could not save themselves. And in the vast emptiness of space, that heart was enough. The station was quiet. Even the hum of life support seemed softer now, almost like it was giving the two of them space to breathe. Days had passed since Elias had rescued Nyxara from the derelict pod, and in that time small routines had formed. Every morning, Elias checked her condition. Every evening, he adjusted the energy emitters to keep her body stable. Nyxara had grown stronger. The first week had been the hardest. Her body was frail, her movements slow and awkward. Simple gestures exhausted her, and every breath seemed borrowed from the stars themselves. But humans were patient. Elias never pushed her too fast, never asked too much. He treated her weakness not as a flaw, but as a problem that could be solved. She had watched him closely from the moment she had awakened. Humans were strange creatures. They did not judge weakness. They did not discard failure. They tinkered. They fixed. They waited. In her species, weakness meant abandonment and failure was a crime. Yet here in this small human station, there was no judgment. Only care. Only effort. "What is this place?" Nyxara asked one morning, her voice a faint whisper as she sat on the edge of the medical platform. She had been able to sit upright for the first time, though her legs still trembled. "It's a small station," Elias replied, adjusting a control panel nearby. "Nothing special, just enough to keep me alive while I keep the satellites working, and enough to keep you alive too." Nyxara studied him carefully. His hands were scarred, his face lined with exhaustion, but his eyes were steady. There was no fear, no hesitation, just determination. She realized she did not understand this. Humans, this one human, had saved her, not for reward, not for recognition, not because it was convenient, simply because it was right. "My people," she began, hesitating, they would have left me." Elias paused, looking at her with quiet seriousness. "Yeah." Humans don't usually do that. We help when we can. We don't just abandon someone because they are weak or different. Nyxara tilted her head, studying his words. Abandonment was natural, she thought, expected. The stars themselves seemed to agree, cold, indifferent, and unchanging. And yet here was a human telling her that some beings refused to abandon others. She wanted to believe it. She wanted to understand it. Elias adjusted the energy emitter near her, increasing the faint glow that kept her body stable. "You're getting stronger," he said softly. "Soon you'll be able to move on your own." Nyxara nodded, though a faint fear lingered in her chest. Strength, she realized, was dangerous. It meant control, it meant power, and yet being weak in front of humans did not feel dangerous, it felt safe. Over the next few days, they settled into a careful routine. Elias showed her how to breathe with the station's life support, how to adjust small energy settings, and how to move without straining her fragile body. He did not explain everything. He did not need to. Humans were not bound by the expectation of perfection. They learned by doing. Nyxara began to observe him beyond his work. She watched how he handled small failures, a circuit breaker that tripped, a panel that refused to calibrate. He did not panic, he did not give up. He tried again, and again, and again. Each attempt brought him closer to a solution. She realized something remarkable. Humans were not the fastest, the strongest, or the most precise beings in the galaxy, yet somehow they survived where others did not. They adapted. They endured. They refused to quit. One evening, as the artificial light of the station dimmed to simulate night, Nyxara spoke quietly. "Why do you care?" Elias looked at her, tired but unbroken. "Because it's the right thing to do. If someone needs help, you help them. Doesn't matter what species, what shape, or what kind of problem they have. That's human," Nyxara tried to understand. "In my world, weakness is dangerous. It brings shame. It brings death. Why would anyone risk themselves for it?" Elias shrugged. "We're not perfect. We make mistakes all the time, but we try. And when we see someone suffering, we don't turn away, not because it's safe, not because it's smart, but because it's what we can do." She studied him in silence. There was no hidden meaning, no plan, no calculation, just truth. And that truth was stronger than any weapon her people had ever known. As the days turned into weeks, Nyxara began to move more freely. She could sit without trembling, stand for longer periods, and even walk slowly around the small room. Each movement was a victory, each breath a quiet celebration. And Elias celebrated each one with her, not with words of praise, but with gentle encouragement and patient guidance. One day, while adjusting an energy emitter, Elias paused and glanced at her. "You're ready for a test," he said simply. Nyxara's eyes widened. "A test? Nothing dangerous," he said, smiling faintly. "Just see if you can absorb energy from the station without using the pod. Your body's strong enough now. I want you to try." Nyxara hesitated. Her instincts screamed caution. In her world, tests were often traps. Fail and you were punished. Fail and you were left to die, but here, this human did not threaten her. He simply offered her a chance to grow. She nodded. Carefully, she approached the emitter. A faint glow spread over her hands as she reached out. Energy flowed into her and she felt warmth, stability, and strength. She was not weak. She was not abandoned. She could survive. Elias watched her closely, making minor adjustments to ensure she remained safe. "Good," he said. "See, you're learning, you're growing, you're alive." For the first time, Nyxara smiled. It was small, hesitant, but real. "Alive," she whispered, tasting the word. It felt foreign, precious, and powerful. That night she could not sleep. She floated near the window, gazing at the stars outside. Endless, cold, and distant. Yet now she felt something else, hope, trust, perhaps even gratitude. Elias entered quietly, noticing her awake. "Can't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. I think I am learning about humans," she said softly. You survive because you care, not because you are perfect, not because you are strong, but because you refuse to give up on each other, even on me." Elias nodded. "That's right. Humans survive because we try. We adapt, we help. That's all we need to do." Nyxara considered his words. Her people had taught her that survival was about strength, power, and perfection. Yet here was proof of something stronger, the courage to help others even when it was inconvenient, even when it was risky. "You are very different," she said. "And that's okay," he replied, smiling. "Different doesn't mean weak." For the first time in her life, Nyxara felt the weight of abandonment lift. She understood that strength could come from patience, from care, from simple, stubborn refusal to leave someone behind. The next few days were filled with small discoveries. Nyxara experimented with moving around the station, learning to control her own energy absorption without the pod. She practiced speaking with Elias, though words were often difficult at first. Humans had strange accents, strange syntax, but they were patient teachers. Elias shared stories of human resilience, of explorers lost in space who found ways to survive, of engineers who rebuilt ships with nothing but scrap metal and determination. Nyxara listened, fascinated. Humans survived not because they were the strongest, but because they refused to quit. She began to understand something remarkable. Her species, though advanced, could not see the value in weakness or mistakes. Humans, though fragile and imperfect, thrived because they embraced them. One morning, Nyxara approached Elias, her movements more confident than before. I think I understand, she said. Humans, they survive because they care. They survive because they refuse to leave behind what others abandon. Elias smiled. Exactly, that's what makes humans human. Nyxara's silver eyes reflected the light of the stars outside. She had been left for dead, abandoned by her own species. But now she was alive. She was learning, and perhaps for the first time she understood the true meaning of strength. Strength was not perfection. Strength was survival. Strength was the courage to care when the galaxy refused to notice. And in the quiet station, drifting among the indifferent stars, Nyxara began to hope. Not just for herself, but for the future. Perhaps humans were right. Perhaps the stars had underestimated her. Because if humanity could save her, maybe she could survive anything. And perhaps one day, she could even repay that mercy in ways her people would never expect. Days had passed since Nyxara first began moving freely around the station. Each day, she learned something new about herself and about humans. Elias had grown used to her curiosity. He did not mind it. Humans, after all, were explorers, and teaching her had become another kind of exploration. Nyxara often sat near the station's observation deck, watching the stars. The endless black seemed cold at first, but she had begun to notice the subtle colors of distant suns, nebulae that glowed faintly, and the slow dance of small asteroids drifting between systems. To her, it was breathtaking and terrifying. Out there beyond the station's walls, the galaxy did not care who survived, but inside the station she was safe, and that safety was a human gift. Elias entered the observation deck one morning carrying a small tablet. He set it on the table beside her. I thought you might like this, he said. Nyxara tilted her head. The tablet glowed with images and symbols she had never seen before. Humans called it a data archive, a collection of knowledge stored in a small, portable device. To her species, knowledge was power, but knowledge without structure was chaos. Elias explained patiently, showing her how to navigate the device. Humans record what we learn, he said, so we don't have to start over every time. We make mistakes, but we try to remember them. Nyxara watched him, fascinated. The concept was simple yet revolutionary to her. Her people relied on instinct, genetic memory, and rigid hierarchy. Mistakes were erased, failures punished. Humans remembered, adapted, and survived. Why do you share knowledge? She asked. Your people, you said humans are weak. Why give power to others? Elias smiled. Because knowledge doesn't take anything away from us. It makes everyone stronger. Humans survive not by keeping secrets, but by sharing what we know. Nyxara's silver eyes widened. She had never imagined such generosity. Sharing information freely was dangerous, even reckless to her species. But humans thrived on it. She began to realize that human weakness was not weakness at all. It was a strength her people could not understand. Over the next week, she spent hours learning. Elias showed her basic engineering principles, how the station systems worked, and how humans solved problems with simple tools. She learned how humans repaired broken circuits using whatever materials were available. She learned how they managed energy carefully, storing it when possible and distributing it when necessary. Most of all, she learned about human ingenuity. Humans survived in impossible conditions, not because they were perfect, but because they adapted. Nyxara could not stop marveling at it. One afternoon, Elias found her sitting quietly in the engineering bay, holding a small tool in her hands. You're thinking, he said softly. I am trying, she admitted. In my world, I would never be allowed to experiment. Mistakes are punished. Here, mistakes are allowed, and humans, you learn from them. Elias nodded. Exactly. Humans survive because we try, fail, and try again. That's how we grow. Nyxara's lips pressed together in thought. She had been abandoned because her body could not sustain itself without external energy. Weakness had been a crime, but humans treated it as a challenge, something to overcome. She began to feel something she had never felt before: hope. As she worked, the station's communication system beeped. Elias glanced at the console and frowned. Huh, he muttered. Looks like someone is trying to contact us. Nyxara moved closer. Who is it? Elias shook his head. Not sure, I don't recognize the signal. Could be another station, could be someone else. He hesitated, then pressed a few buttons to open the channel. A distorted voice came through, speaking a language Nyxara recognized immediately. Her body tensed. They have found me, she whispered. Elias looked at her, noticing her fear. Found you who? My people, she said. Her voice was low, almost trembling. They believed I was lost, left to die, but now they know I survived. Elias frowned. And that's bad, Nyxara shook her head slowly. Not bad, dangerous. They do not understand humans. They will expect me to return. They will expect obedience. Elias' eyes narrowed. And you don't want to go? I do not know, she admitted, her fingers clenched at her sides. I have learned something new. Humans, they survive because they care. They survive because they adapt. And I am alive because of them. Elias nodded. Then maybe it's worth staying alive a little longer. Nyxara looked at him, the faintest trace of a smile on her lips. You saved me. And I will not forget it. The following days were tense but quiet. Nyxara continued her lessons, learning more about human systems and culture. She learned how humans solved conflicts without fighting. She learned how they built machines to do impossible tasks. She learned how they survived in the coldest, most dangerous parts of space, not through strength or perfection, but through ingenuity and care. Elias watched her progress with quiet pride. She was no longer the fragile being he had rescued from the pod. She was strong in a different way, strong enough to survive, strong enough to understand humans, and strong enough to see the galaxy with new eyes. One evening, as they watched the stars together, Nyxara spoke softly. Humans, you call it weakness, but it is something else, she said. You do not fear failure, you do not punish mistakes, you survive because you adapt. Elias smiled. Exactly, and now you're learning it too. Nyxara nodded, her eyes reflecting the distant stars. She had been abandoned, left for dead, and considered a burden. But here, with humans, she had learned something far more important. Survival was not about power or perfection. It was about perseverance, care, and the courage to continue when the galaxy had given up. And slowly, she began to feel that perhaps humans were the strongest creatures in the universe, not because they could dominate, but because they could endure. Her thoughts were interrupted by another signal from her species. This time the communication was direct, personal, and unmistakable. Nyxara, the voice said, we know you are alive, return immediately. Nyxara's body stiffened. The voice carried authority, expectation, and unspoken threat. Her people had always demanded obedience. Disobedience was not tolerated. Survival without them was impossible until now. Elias glanced at her. Do you want to answer? She shook her head. Not yet. I need to understand them. I need to understand humans first. Then I will decide. Elias nodded. Then we wait. And we learn. Together, they spent the night analyzing the signals. Elias explained the technology behind the communication, showing Nyxara how humans interpreted signals and how they could respond if necessary. She learned quickly, understanding the principles behind human methods. She realized that humans did not rely solely on strength or fear. They relied on knowledge, preparation, and creativity. For the first time, Nyxara considered that perhaps she did not need to fear her people. Not if she could think, plan, and act like a human. Days passed. Each time her species sent a signal, Nyxara responded with calculated patience. She did not hide, she did not panic, she did not obey blindly. She learned, observed, and adapted. Elias watched her, noting the change. She was no longer the helpless alien he had rescued. She was becoming something new, a bridge between species. She was learning the human definition of mercy, endurance, and intelligence, and slowly she began to see a path forward. A path where she was not abandoned, a path where she was not weak, a path where she could survive not just for herself, but for those who had given her a second chance. For Nyxara, the galaxy was no longer just cold stars and indifferent void. It was a place of possibility. And humans, These strange, stubborn creatures were her guide. And perhaps she thought as she watched Elias adjust a console with quiet focus, humans were not the fragile species her people had underestimated. Perhaps humans were the species that could teach her true strength, the courage to endure, to care, and to survive when the stars had given up. Part IV. When the abandon becomes the bridge, the quiet hum of the station was familiar now, almost comforting. For Nyxara, it had become more than a shelter. It had become a place of learning, of discovery, and of unexpected friendship. Elias moved around her with ease, adjusting panels, repairing minor faults, and explaining the purpose behind every tool. Nyxara had grown stronger, her body more capable of absorbing the ambient energy she had once depended on the pod to provide. But more than that, she had grown in understanding, of humans, of survival, and of herself. For the first time in her life, Nyxara felt the weight of being alive not as a burden, but as a choice. Her species had rejected her because she was weak, because she could not survive on her own. Yet here she was, alive, thriving, learning from a human who treated her weakness as a problem to solve rather than a flaw to punish. It was a revelation. One morning, as Nyxara floated near the observation window, Elias joined her. He held a small tablet, scrolling through reports of signals detected across nearby systems. "Something caught my attention," he said. "These readings, they're unusual, not dangerous, just curious." Nyxara leaned closer, her silver eyes narrowing at the symbols and graphs. Something in her chest tightened. Are they from my people?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Elias nodded. "I think so. They're trying to communicate, but these signals are different from before. It's almost like they are analyzing." Nyxara's mind raced. Her species had always been rigid in thought, strict in their rules. But now it seemed they were noticing something unusual, her survival. She had expected anger, commands, perhaps punishment, but this was different. Curiosity, perhaps even doubt. "They are questioning," she said softly. "They are surprised." Elias smiled faintly. "Then we have a chance." Nyxara studied him. "A chance for what?" "To show them there is more than one way to survive," he said. "To show them humans are right, and maybe that they could learn something too." Her thoughts turned inward. Could she influence them? Could she take the lessons she had learned here and use them to show her species that survival was not about rigid strength, but about adaptation, care, and intelligence? The idea was terrifying and thrilling. Over the next few days, Nyxara began her work. She analyzed the communication signals from her species, learning their patterns, frequencies, and intentions. She began to reply carefully, not with defiance, but with information. She described human methods of energy distribution, problem-solving, and survival strategies. She explained the concepts of patience, adaptation, and cooperation, principles her species had always ignored or dismissed. Each reply she sent was a small rebellion, but also a lesson. She did not hide her human influence. Instead, she shared it as an example, showing that survival could be achieved without strict control or punishment. Elias watched her quietly. "You're teaching them," he said one evening. "That's impressive." Nyxara glanced at him, a faint smile on her lips. I am trying. They need to understand. They left me to die. But humans saved me, and they are right. Survival can be more than just strength." Elias nodded. "And you're showing them that that's what humans do. We find solutions where others see problems." It was a slow process. Her species did not easily accept ideas from one considered weak. Many of their messages were formal, demanding, and skeptical. But Nyxara was patient. She responded with logic, clarity, and examples. She showed them how humans adapted to hostile environments, how even fragile beings could thrive if they worked together, observed carefully, and learned from mistakes. For the first time, some of her species began to listen. Not all, not yet. But cracks appeared in their rigid assumptions. They questioned her survival. They questioned the necessity of abandonment, and in those questions, Nyxara saw opportunity. One day, a new message arrived. This one was different. It was neither commanding nor skeptical. It was tentative, almost uncertain. "Nyxara," the voice said, "explain how you survived. What methods allowed this outcome?" Nyxara's pulse quickened. This was what she had been waiting for, not obedience, not fear, curiosity. She composed her response carefully, explaining the human methods she had observed: patience, problem-solving, cooperation, and adaptation. She described how Elias had saved her, not because she was strong, but because he refused to abandon her. She included technical details but focused on the philosophy behind human survival. When she transmitted the message, she felt a strange thrill. Her species had never asked for advice. They had never acknowledged human methods. And now, they were listening. Elias glanced over her shoulder. "You know," he said, "this could change everything for them. You're not just alive, you're a bridge." Nyxara stared at the stars. "A bridge," she repeated. She had never imagined that being abandoned could lead to this. That weakness, once considered a curse, could become a lesson. That human care, simple and persistent, could challenge centuries of rigid belief. As the days passed, Nyxara continued her careful communication. Her species sent more questions, slowly opening to the idea that perhaps there was value in patience, in adaptation, in helping those considered weak. She included examples of human strategies, showing how even small errors could be corrected, how survival did not require perfection, only effort and ingenuity. Elias supported her every step. He explained human methods in ways she could transmit, helped her organize her thoughts, and reminded her of the principles that had saved her life. "You're not just teaching them to survive," he said one evening. "You're teaching them to see differently, and that's remarkable." Nyxara looked at him, her silver eyes reflecting the distant starlight. "It is terrifying," she admitted, "to challenge my people, to show them another way, but it is also necessary." Together they worked tirelessly. Each communication was precise, thoughtful, and deliberate. Nyxara had learned the human way: observe, adapt, act. And with each message, she felt her confidence grow. Her species began to respond with more openness, acknowledging the success of her survival and the validity of human strategies. Some even hinted at the possibility of reconsidering their rigid doctrines. Nyxara's heart swelled. She had not only survived, but she was changing the way her people thought. And yet, she remained cautious. Not all of her species were willing to accept these ideas. Some remained rigid, skeptical, and demanding, but that did not deter her. Humans had taught her that persistence, intelligence, and care could overcome even the harshest obstacles. One night, as she floated near the observation deck, Elias joined her, holding 2 small cups of a warm liquid humans drank to relax. "Here," he said, handing one to her. "For thinking." Nyxara accepted it, her fingers brushing his briefly. "Thinking humans make everything seem simple," she said softly. Elias laughed. "It's not simple, it's just different, and that's okay." They sat together in silence, watching the stars. For the first time, Nyxara felt a sense of peace. She was no longer abandoned. She was no longer weak. She was alive, learning, and slowly changing the world around her. Her thoughts turned to her species, to the questions they were beginning to ask, and to the future. If humans could save her, and she could survive because of them, perhaps she could also teach her people that survival did not require perfection. Perhaps she could show them the strength in adaptation, care, and intelligence. And maybe, just maybe, she could create a bridge between 2 species, one abandoned, one persistent, showing that true strength was not in power alone, but in the courage to endure, learn, and help others. The stars outside continued to shine, indifferent yet beautiful. And inside the station, Nyxara and Elias continued their quiet work, 2 unlikely companions shaping a future that had once seemed impossible. For Nyxara, the abandoned had become the bridge. And for humanity, the act of saving her had proven once again that strength could be found not in domination, but in care, ingenuity, and the refusal to let go.